Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Who We've Become. And it is our final episode of Women's History Month. And I have my good friend Taylor on, who we've known each other since high school, since freshman year of high school at El Medina. So it's probably 14, 15, which is
Okay.
going on right around 25 years now since we've all hit 40 this year.
Oh
We're
my God.
all we're all coming in that golden age of 40. So we're hitting that age where we all have stories to tell. So Taylor reached out to me through the podcast, and we've been kind of going back and forth over the past couple days. Thank you, Taylor, for reaching out and telling me briefly about your story. I definitely want to hear a little bit more. You reached out, kind of told me briefly from a very high level standpoint what's been going on. Taylor sent me a message, and everybody who has children know that it's not only hard to have kids, but Taylor mentioned that she's got a couple, and both of them have disabilities. And so I can only imagine how hard it would be. Not only I have three boys myself, which is hard enough, but if one, two, or all three of them, God forbid, had disabilities, how hard that would be. So, we're going to be here today to kind of talk about how Taylor and her husband kind of get through the day to day lives of having kids with disabilities, and kind of how they go through the motions of handling that, how they dealt with it in the beginning, how they deal with it through their growing up, and how they kind of deal with it now, and how it helps shape them, and what they're doing out in their public life, and how it kind of helps shape their outlook in the future. So with that, Taylor, I'll let you kind of take it away, start from the beginning, and kind of how you learned about everything, and your first child and then your second child, and kind of where you're at today.
Sounds good. Well, thank you for putting this platform on, Brandon. I think like what you're doing is so wonderful, and I appreciate the space to talk about. I am a little nervous to share. I haven't been publicly open about my story, a lot, and so I'm still trying to find my voice around it. But I'm very excited to start talking about it. So thank you for this opportunity to do so. It's definitely so I'll say it's, we're dealing with neurodivergence with our children. And I know that's kind of a big topic that's kind of become more aware, for people. And so I'm grateful at least that we're going through this in this time, that people are talking about it more. But yeah, thank you for this opportunity to share my story. So I do have two children, like Brandon mentioned. I have a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old. And really the journey started with my 7-year-old. Just being different from a young age. No, like young as a baby, he was hitting all his milestones, started talking, walking, all those things. So we really didn't know anything was going on at the beginning. But then as he was getting older and he was starting to hit 3, 4 at the school age time, he would just engage differently. He would be very like vocal and chatty, but wasn't having conversations. He would get really excited and use his hands a lot. But we thought, okay, maybe he's just excited. And, earlier on we had talked to the pediatrician who never said anything. She's like, yeah, he might just be a little bit quirky or he's excited, but there was no indication of anything. I remember filling out questionnaires about, is your child, autistic, and nothing was coming up. We even at one point went to a pediatric neuropsychologist. No, excuse me, pediatric neurologist. I'm trying to remember all the different medical professionals we've seen, who was, was told to us to be, the best in the field. And she had a conversation with him. My oldest, his name is Adrian, by the way. And she was like, oh, he's making eye contact. He's engaging with me. I think he's just quirky. Maybe he's just highly sensitive. He's picking up on people's emotions, and that's what's going on. So we were like, okay. So we got him into some therapies at OT speech just to help, but still nothing was coming up. And, the pandemic hit and we had our second son, so there was a lot going on, so we kind of stopped focusing on it. We just thought, okay, our son's just, he just has just different characteristics. So get to fall of 2021, when our son was going to start TK in the public school system. And again, no one had like warned us about trying to get like an IEP or anything. And so he just started school, regular TK. Day one, about an hour after the school day had started, I get a phone call from the school, and they said, your son is having a meltdown in the bathroom. You need to come pick him up right now. And of course, that's like every parent's nightmare, right? You never want to get that phone call. You're always waiting for it. And I had my other son who was napping. I had to like scramble to get a sitter for him. So anyway, I go, but my heart just sunk into my chest because I just could tell something was not right.
Right.
And I got there, and the first thing is the office person was like yelling at me, like, your son was making a scene, like it was his fault. He was making the other kids uncomfortable. And I was like, where is he? And they're like, well, they left him in the bathroom because he's not fully toilet trained, and we can't deal with it because he doesn't have an IEP. So they just left him.
And was he
in the
toilet trained by then?
Not really. He had a lot of anxiety about it. That was the thing we struggled with.
Okay.
He knows what to do conceptually, but he's got some difficulties with his hands, some sensitivities. And so like getting himself dressed and undressed was difficult for him. He's a kind of a perfectionist. So when he doesn't do things right away, he gets frustrated and he'll stop.
Got it.
So so day one, we actually sent him in pull-ups because we thought, let's just like take away that issue. Like, we didn't want it to be a problem. Again, no one had like indicated that was going to be an issue or anything. So we just thought that would be fine. But because all of a sudden they made everyone go to the bathroom on that first day, all the kids, he went in there because he's a people pleaser too, and he wanted to make his teacher happy. He went in and then he got stuck. He couldn't figure it out. They couldn't help him because he didn't have an IEP. And for liability reasons, they didn't want to deal with it. So they just left him in there until I got there. So I'll try not to get emotional about this. But so I get there, and again, they're reprimanding him and me for the situation. And my poor little, I think he was 5-year-old at the time, 4-year-old, was stuck in this bathroom, just scared. And I went in there, and he just had the big eyes looking at me. He had a little crown that he was wearing because they had made him the first thing in the morning with his name on it. He was like, you could tell he was trying to be brave, but clearly that was a very traumatic incident. And it broke me. It just like shattered my soul. So I kept it together. I wanted to be strong and brave for him, and got him out of there. But they basically said he's not welcome back until he's toilet trained or he has an IEP. But no, like, here's how you can do that. Here's who you can talk to. Like I just felt so completely lost and didn't know what to do. And mind you, like all this time, like I had gone to school for marriage and family therapy. I'd been in the psychology world. Like I thought I was equipped to understand these things, to handle them. But as you know, Brandon, when it's your own child, like you can logically know all the things in the world.
Well, and you'd think from a public school standpoint, I mean, if they're prepped for, hey, if a child comes with a IEP, then they know what to do. Then they would know where an IEP comes from, and they would say, hey, if your child is going to need an IEP, this is where you get it from. Then they would have at least the resources to tell you, hey, this is where you get it from.
Right. And I
at least give you something.
Exactly. And I'd asked, I said, well, okay, you're saying he needs IEP to have this. I understand the procedural part of it. I understand policy, right? I certainly wasn't trying to break a rule on purpose.
Right.
And so I had asked, then how can I get this? And they were like, well, that's a lot of work. They were very dismissive. It was just a horrible experience. And I think at the time, again, my son was in like occupational therapy and speech. And so I think he had an appointment later that day, and I went and I like broke down to them because they were the only ones I had a good relationship with. And so they helped me. They're like, email the school psychologist at your school district, say you want an evaluation, and try to get that IEP. And so we did, and the school did a evaluation. And from their assessment, he qualified for for autism accommodations. But we still didn't officially have a diagnosis because, again, he wasn't like autistic enough. And
Mm-hmm.
so, that I think for me was the most frustrating part. Um, because just kind of segueing, like my younger son has a neurodevelopmental condition, but that's very rare. It's called trio, and that was a whole journey to find out. But his fits in a better box. So like from a much earlier age, the system kind of helped navigate it automatically. That was like a lot smoother sailing because he was disabled enough, or it was more obvious. And so, but yeah, so back to my older son again, just finding this out and going through that whole process. You're up against all these systems. You're trying to navigate, like you said, and no one's really telling us as parents really where to go. It's just expected that you got to fight for certain things. You got to ask for certain things. You got to advocate because, as I found through the process, my husband found through the process, they're not going to be upfront with like, oh, here, have all these accommodations to help your kid. They're going to try to lowball it because they don't want to pay for it. And so we didn't realize going into it how much advocacy there was going to be, how much fighting we were going to have to do just to get my son to have accommodations so that he would not be traumatized in the classroom. So that was the beginning of that journey with school.
So to kind of summarize, so both your kids have, I guess, some form of autism,
My
but
youngest one is technically not autistic. Yeah, it's a different.
so your younger one has kind of like a different
Diagnosis.
setup, but he's more in this box of whatever the disorder is, and
Right.
so everybody's like, oh yeah, he fits that. Where
Yep.
your oldest is like, well, he's kind of autistic, but not
Yep.
really. Ergo, you have to fight harder for your oldest. And see, I mean, it's really tough because it's kind of like all these different issues within, like, not only schools but just the medical field in general, where they're kind of nitpicky these days, as is with pretty much everything, not only with kids but adults as well, where it becomes this, well, yeah, you have a problem, but you're not as bad as this person. And because you're not as bad as this person, we can't help you as much as we're helping this person.
Right.
And then it becomes that, well, what am I, chopped liver? I would imagine it's especially hard when it's your child. So when the school kind of tells you that, when the initial kind of shock happens, and then you kind of realize, like, okay, your oldest son, what did you say, Adrian? So when the school kind of tells you, or when the school psychologist tells you, okay, this is where you're at, this is what's going on emotionally, what's going through your head? He's gone through 4 or 5 years. Nobody's told you anything. Nobody's told you, everybody's told you your son's fine. Your son's fine. You have no issues. Emotionally, and by then your youngest son has been born, and did you guys already know that he had some sort of developmental disorder, your youngest, by that time?
Not yet. No. Yeah.
So when this comes out, like, how did you and your husband, like, hold it together? Like, how did you what did you guys start thinking about emotionally? Like, all of a sudden, like, hey, you guys have this normal lifestyle, and things are going through, public school's going fine. Because, like, I remember when our oldest Jax, right, when he was getting into school, it's like, throw your kid in public school. Okay, he's going to public school, TK. My Jax he was an October baby, so he was in TK. Okay, we throw him into public school. He goes to school 8 to 12:30 or whatever for TK. He goes to school 8 to 12:30. You throw him into public school. You go away. You come back. You pick him up. Period. All's done. that's what a normal parent would think, and that's no longer your life. What starts going through your head from an emotional standpoint, and
Mhm.
what is now the conversations between you and your husband
Mhm. Yeah.
going forward? Like what happens at that point?
Yeah.
And again, you've probably seen Erica's podcast, so if you need a break, if you need to just kind of take
Mhm.
some deep breaths, go ahead.
Mhm.
It's
Thank you.
I
Thank you.
mean, we've been through it's an emotional rough thing. I know a lot of us have kids, and so
Mhm.
don't
Yeah. No, I thank you
if
for
you
that.
if you got to breathe,
That
it's a
takes it.
tough question.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
know, but like what's kind of going through your head at
Yeah.
that time?
Yeah. No, and it's a good question, and I think one maybe that needs to be talked about more because it's complex. I can, I'm okay right now, but thank you. I may make it triggered, but I mean, ultimately, it's a grieving process, right? At first, like it shattered us. It shattered us emotionally, right? You don't want your kid to have to suffer in any capacity. You don't want your kid being different in any capacity. You don't want your
Hmm.
kid to struggle with things in any capacity, right? And so all of a sudden yeah, something's wrong, right? And that wrong
Hmm.
just like, yeah. And for me, it's hard to describe. I mean, I think at first, like I felt it, but my go-to is like I'm just going to go into like trying to understand it. So I just went into like research mode, and my husband's kind of the same. We're very analytical, like a big part of why we're together. We just love to have those like conversations. We're just dissecting things
Hmm.
and breaking it down. So we go from a very like cognitive place at first. So I think we would kind of just try to attack it, like, okay, what can we do? Like, let's get all the research. I want to understand. I want to know, but it certainly, I think it's just a grieving process because, like you said, there was this idea of how my children's lives were going to be. There was this idea of how parenting was going to look, and school, and then just the natural development. And all of a sudden, in 1 second, no, it's gonna be different, and we don't know what that is. And we were both aware. We know enough about like how the world views disabilities, and especially invisible
Yeah.
disabilities like mental health challenges. It's hard, right? We see movies where they characterize it. You see like the Big Bang Theory where they have Sheldon being like the laughing stock, right? Because he's got certain ways of doing I mean, just all that stuff kind of comes out, and it's like, well, fuck. Excuse my language.
Yeah. Hey, we,
um
we're allowed explicit language on here, so
yeah, thank you.
do what you got to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't. It was just. I think it took a while to really get our heads around it. I think later it would hit me just at random times. I think similar to grief, like actual loss of just like I'd feel like, okay, I'm okay. I have some answers. I have a plan. We're gonna get him assessed at this doctor. We're gonna get him this combination. Right. I've now like followed these Instagram posts where I can see people with lived experience say it's okay. Like there's more awareness around it. I'm okay. And then my son will do something and a kid will look at him weird, or someone will make a comment, or even a family member with good intentions will be like, hey, you need to get him to have more friends, or something to imply that he needs to be fixed. And it just will shatter me. I'll be on the floor in the bathroom in the fetal position crying because I know that that's how the world may perceive my child. And then what does that mean on how they perceive me as a parent? And just the judgments and the yeah, and I think even worse sometimes is like people thinking they care and they want to give you the advice. It feels just as much like, well, now we're a charity case or we're not good enough. I mean, it just triggers all of every emotion, every thing you can think of. And my husband, for all this, the beauty of it, like we were so strong through it. We came at it as a team. So I'm so grateful that I had a partner that we could talk about these things. I could, like, if I'm having a meltdown, he hold it together and be there, or vice versa. We could talk about it. So we did talk a lot about it. And again, I think being in the mental health field, and my husband's a teacher, we just are very much, we can have those conversations. I think that's really what helps get us through. And then just like I said, a lot of understanding and research. And I think it went from the mindset of like, what's wrong with my kid? And I went into like, yeah, I got to fix them. Like they're throwing like ABA therapy things at me, and you got to get him to these treatments and everything. And here's how to make him more normal, put him in a social skills group. And like, none of that felt right. I was like, why does my son have to be in charge of being fixed so that he makes other people comfortable. And I actually I started pushing back and being like, screw that. Like, no, my son is beautiful the way he is, and he's happy. He doesn't realize there's a problem. And so why am I, making it a problem? I realize my anxieties around it and my worrying about what other people thought were more of the stumbling blocks than anything, because I was kind of going into that. I need to fix him because I wanted to feel better about it. And I've come to a place, it's taken some time, but I've really taken hold of this neurodiversity affirming attitude and I think you had said the medical field, right? The medical field still looks at mental health and developmental conditions or as a deficit. And there's this new paradigm of the social model that says, no, those are all social constructs, right? Like school is this is the standard and we have to make all the kids fit into it. And this new construct is saying, no, that's a neurotypical kid might go that route. But if you have autism or ADHD or any other neurodevelopmental conditions that are neurodivergent, they diverge from the norm, it's just going to look differently. And so that's really kind of also given me a lot of strength to be I think there's more acceptance around it. But going back to sorry, and I can get analytical about it, but the emotional piece, it's a daily struggle. I can have moments where I'm like, yeah, my kid's great. He'll do something that's so sweet and connected and wonderful. And it's wow, how does a 7-year-old think that way? And then he'll go to school and we'll have teachers saying he needs to stop wearing headphones, or he needs to be more normal so kids won't talk, instead of saying hey, we'll just talk to the other kids and make people understand that different people just need different ways of doing things. So
Yeah.
that was a whole, I don't even know if that answered your question, but
Yeah. No, it did. And it was good. Now, cause I know last year when I was unemployed for a considerable amount of time, I have a background in finance, and I have a whole family budget all set up. And so quite often, I would find myself looking at the budget and saying, okay, we have this much money in the bank. And so if I pay this bill at this time and I know this money is coming in, I can pay the bill at this time, and then this is coming in, so we can afford to do this, and then I can put this here. So I'm using my experience to kind of move things around and get everything in to make sure the bills are paid, make sure that we're not homeless, make sure that we have food, make sure that all that stuff's going on. So with your profession as an MFT, did you quite often see your professional skills come into kind of your daily life when dealing with your son? How's that experience been? Do you often find yourself popping in some of your psychological experience in your educational experience, coming in and just being now, Adrian, this is what we doing some of that stuff.
oh
What's
yeah,
that experience
oh
when
yeah.
you kind of talk to him?
Yeah, well, I mean, you can ask my husband. I've been psychoanalyzing him since grad school, so he's been my guinea pig for
There you
everything.
go.
Poor guy, I've diagnosed him with everything. He's got all the things.
Of
Um,
course.
yeah, no, yeah, yes. I think at first I was okay, when we found out what was happening, I definitely was okay, let me think about this from a psychological lens. And I really wanted to come at it as a very compassionate, um, validating, affirming place. So I would, right, I do, I'll tell Adrian, if he's having big emotions and he's getting activated and dysregulated, I'm okay, Adrian, let's take a breath, let's use it. So I do tap into the my background. But I will say, again, when it's your own child, a lot of that goes out the window at first, because that cloud of emotions covers any logic, right? Anything. I will say that this journey through him, he's actually taught me to be a better therapist. He's actually taught me to have a way better approach in working with people because of understanding his unique perspective of life, so that I have more empathy and compassion when I work with different people than any textbook could have given me. So
Okay.
I will say that's probably more of it. But yeah, I mean, in the parenting part of it, like going through it, yeah, definitely brought
That's
in my
good.
professional stuff. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you have a couple years ago, Adrian starts school.
Mm-hmm.
You go through that. You have that heartache. You have that struggle, that stress. Year or so goes by. You have your second son. Go to the pediatrician. Go to the doctors. Your
Mm-hmm.
second son has developmental issues.
Mm-hmm.
Your husband and you are like, holy shit.
Mm-hmm.
Here we go for round two.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry to bring up more emotions, but
Bring them on.
and I'm you I don't know if you can see because of the light. I'm tearing up myself because I can only imagine what you're going through. How do you deal with that shit emotionally? I mean, we've been having this conversation for the last 25 minutes or so about your oldest, but we haven't even scratched the surface yet of now you got to go for a second round. Now you got to get knocked out a second time. How do you guys emotionally handle that? Being told the second time, hey, I know you guys are going through this struggle with your oldest son, but guess what? I know you have this this light side of autism with your oldest, but now you got this real heavy disability with your youngest. How do you guys handle that?
That's a good question. And I will say, like, I probably am seeming like making light of this, like I'm okay. But it does take a little bit of denial and disassociation
Oh, I bet.
to function, right? Because otherwise I would fall apart. Yeah. It's, at first you're like, why? Like, why? It definitely triggers, like, I have my own insecurities. I have my own things. And then I'm responsible for two lives that are going to be impacted by these challenges. And it's shattering. Yeah, like it started with like why are we going through this? Why do we have to watch our son be knocked out so he could have MRIs so we can figure out if something's wrong with his brain? Why are we having to go to doctor's appointments and therapy appointments? And yeah, I think it just starts with why.
And I know, kind of sidestepping it for a second, because I know a little bit ago I brought up autistic, double autism, and you said that it was a different disease. What particularly is, I don't want to say ignorance that I have, what is, I guess you can say, developmentally wrong with your youngest? I don't know, because you had mentioned what he has. I'm not familiar medically with what he has.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned MRIs and stuff like that. What, I know the autistic side with your oldest, what developmentally, for those listening or those who end up listening to this podcast, is the issue with your youngest?
Yeah, I mean, so that's a good question. And we're still mostly ignorant too because he's got a neurodevelopmental disorder called trio. And I think like 200 people in the entire world have it. So
What?
yeah, it is an extremely rare thing that there's not a lot of information about. So we don't even know.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. And that took a while because all the tests, I mean, he went through blood tests and testing, the MRIs, the x-rays, before they didn't know what was going on either. His pediatrician didn't know. We were at shock. And finally through like a metabolic specialist, after several rounds of genetic testing, a metabolic specialist was like, there's this extra test. It's like insurance doesn't cover it. But you can try and it'll go down to like a more molecular level. And I don't know the science. I apologize for not knowing the scientific language around it. But essentially through that, they found it's like in his, I think it's chromosomal. It's like in the third one. So that's why it's called trio. And I think it ultimately what we know about it, it just impacts his overall delays, his overall like global developmental delays. So like he's 4, but he's still not walking or talking, and like his I think probably his cognitive levels maybe like a 2-year old. So we don't know. I mean, I have his pediatrician calling me asking what to do because she doesn't even know. There's a few research um, articles you can look up. They were all done out of the UK. That's where the main research is out of. So there's some things, but most of the kids that have been diagnosed are still like under age 10. So even we don't know what it means long term. And there's a lot of questions. So that adds even more stress and anxiety because we don't.
I was gonna say now I see why you got so emotional, man. Geez, not only does your youngest have a developmental issue, but 1 in 200 kids in the entire what
World.
7-8 billion people in the world, 200. God, I can only imagine. I had a hard enough time when my middle son was under UV lights because his jaundice was high. If he was 1 in 200 out of the whole population, dude, I can only imagine. And there's the studies got to be like this because there's nobody there
There's not enough sample size really to give us long term data to
do anything
do
because it's
anything.
so rare. I mean, it's like, I mean, and it's one of those things where you can't even, I mean, you're just like forced to go day by day blind because you don't know what to do. Like, it's not like autism, or it's not like Down syndrome, or it's not like ADHD or anything like that, because there are enough studies to where what to do on a daily basis. This, you just throw your arms up and you're like, your guess is as good as mine. It's like, wow. I mean, I can only imagine.
And
Your
it's amazing.
reaction was tame compared to what mine would be. I mean,
Well,
I could see why you said I'm holding it in because of the denial. The
yeah,
denial is just the sheer number of 200 out of the entire population of the entire freaking world. Wow.
yeah. And as
That's,
parents, we have to keep it together, right? Like I can't
yeah.
break down every day. I have 2 children I've got to take care of and be strong for. And so,
I have to say, your profession is probably partially saving you. If anything,
Joe?
I would have to honestly look at it and say, if you had any other profession,
Mhm.
it would probably assist. And if you don't, if it's a personal question and you don't want to answer it, it's perfectly fine. Do you have a kind of a religious
Mhm.
background, or is it, because you had that when I asked you about your youngest and the now 2 kids, you brought up the why us, and I remember, because I grew up I'm not shy talking about it. I grew up with a Episcopal religious background. I'm
Mhm.
more of a spiritual person, and so the last year it was more, why is the universe beating me down? I'm more of a karmic type of person.
Mhm. Mhm.
Like, karma beat me to hell last year. I had done something wrong where karma
Mhm.
was coming back to bite me in the ass. And so
Mhm. Mhm.
um when you have that kind of feeling of why me,
Mhm.
is it more existential, universal, or is it more religious,
Mhm.
why God me type
Right.
of feeling? And
Mhm.
again,
Mhm.
if you don't want
Yeah.
to get into it, that's
No.
perfectly fine. If you're comfortable talking about it,
Yeah.
I
I'll
welcome the
talk.
conversation.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to talk. I think because of my profession, like for me, like talking about it is what helps, right? And I was raised at Presbyterian Christian, but not like hardcore, right? I went to church growing up. My husband's Catholic, so we have like the Christian religion, God part of that. But I mean, I'm not super religious. I'm like you, I would say, more spiritual. And this definitely put that through the test. Yeah. Why me in a probably an existential more way of life? God, it's like a great question, and I don't even know like
Yeah.
how to go with that. Because in my work too, it's opened my eyes to be right. I do believe there's a spiritual force somehow with us, right? What that's called, like to me, it doesn't even matter, right? We can put labels on it. It helps psychologically connect with something, ground ourselves, feel less scared. I believe there is like a higher power, but I got out of like the needing to have a label for it. And everyone's experience with spirituality, whether it's Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, I mean anything, right? Everyone's experience, I think at the core, it's the same thing. That's at least my belief. So I mean that's my background and where I think of those things. So I do kind of like I do question like I would pray about it a little bit, and for me it was more calling towards like I went very like ancestral, like to my grandparents that I feel like are like guardian angels to kind of help guide me through that. But yeah, I don't know. It definitely brings up like why, and it does make you think of that bigger picture, like why us. And my husband is actually very good at putting that into perspective, and he'll say like we all have these things to overcome in adversity, but it does he does look at it as like it'll make us stronger. We'll be more empathetic to people with different backgrounds and paths and everything because of what we went through. And if that can make us better people, because for me, I just want to be a great person and help. I mean, that's why I got into this profession. I just want to use whatever I have to pay it forward, because I know I have a lot of privilege in a lot of other areas. And so if this experience can help just do that, like you said, like with my profession, it did help. Like I went back into my work, and because of what I went through with my kids, a lot of my clients, I am able to help like gear them towards resources for that support. My practice now, I really want to lean into supporting families that have children with diagnoses, because when you go through it, there's so much for the children, which is wonderful that there should be therapies and supports and everything. But the parents, like I was saying, are like, here, you need to do all these things. You need to navigate these systems, and there's nothing. What about it? We're still human beings too as parents, and
Mhm.
so that's kind of my mission now, is to use this that way. And I know it got away from the spiritual part of it, but I feel like it's all connected to why we all exist, whatever you want to call that. So
Oh yeah.
that's
I mean, it's the whole reason why I started up the podcast was it was kind of beat down to this why me, why me, why me, and that belief in the karmic retribution. And then I finally got the job with USA Water Polo, and wasn't nearly as much as I was making, and we're still struggling to kind of get there. But it was something. It was enough to get by. It was breadcrumbs. It was, hey, here's a little something. And it was like, okay,
mm-hmm,
I'm back on my feet. So
mm-hmm,
let me continue the good graces that karma's given me, and let me continue to give back in my old ways, which was
mm-hmm,
helping
mm-hmm,
other people. And so that's why
mm-hmm.
I kind of started this, to kind of hopefully give back from an emotional standpoint. And,
Yeah.
I want to take this bigger and better, and,
Yeah.
uh, just kind of hopefully connect people from a more emotional standpoint.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And I
so,
would say like, and I think there is that healing from helping, right? From kind of, it's easier to objectify is the wrong word. It's easier to have an objective perspective, right? When we can like look at someone else going through it and help them, because oftentimes
mhm.
we project onto others, right? What we need for ourselves. And at the risk of putting my therapist hat on, but I think, that's so great. And I would say, and we all, I think, need to continue tapping into our healing for ourselves.
Mhm.
Like for you, right? Like, were you able to get your own like therapy or healing and connect with why, the things happened in your life that led to the point that you're at now? Because nothing happens by chance, right? And it sounds like that was led by your own emotional wounds and experiences and things. I didn't mean to throw it back on you.
I'm
That's just my
I'm getting fully to that point. I'm
yeah. Sorry.
slowly getting there. So I'm getting the comfortability
Mm-hmm,
through the hosting part of it.
mm-hmm,
And I'm really close with my wife's cousin, he's a very outgoing person.
mm-hmm,
And I'm gonna have him on from a host or as a guest
mm-hmm,
in a few weeks. And then the following week, it's actually going to be a role reversal week where he is going to be the host and I'm actually going to be the guest and I'm going to tell my story. So
mm-hmm.
it's a slightly lengthier one because there are multiple steps to it because there were multiple situations, not just last year, but a couple other
Mm-hmm.
situations that kind of beat me down and brought me to where I'm at. Um, so that will come, and yes, that will get me kind of to that
Yeah.
hopefully fully healing point. But yes, it's
And
coming.
yeah.
It's coming to that point within the
Right.
next month or so.
Well, good. Yeah. And I know
So
I'm
yeah.
biased, but I mean, like, that ultimately is why I can be here at this place. And what we went through is I finally realized, because I went hard first on, like, just like anyone, I think any parent, like, fix the problem, right? Focus on the child, like, go really deep into that. And on this journey and through my work, I realized that's not the issue. And I think this is true of any parent, but like, our children trigger everything in us, right? They trigger our
Hmm.
insecurities. They trigger all the things we didn't have when we were their age, right? We see what they're going through and we're projecting it onto them. Like, well, when I was your age, this is what was going through. And if I didn't have the emotional tools to get through the things I needed in the way I needed it, I didn't have the validation, or even like, hey, I'm feeling different and no one's saying it's okay, so you learn to internalize, like, something's wrong with me. I'm going to mask by drinking. I'm going to mask by eating. I'm going to and so there's so many levels of it, and then we're parents and all that just like comes up. And
Hmm.
I realized, like, the work that's more important first, before I can even like be fully there to support my kids, is I got to work on my own stuff. I got to be honest. I got to be kind of go inward and deal with that, so that I'm not projecting, like, when my son, something happens, I'm not quickly going like, danger, danger, because of my experiences, and I'm going to react the way I need it, because that doesn't help my child, because he's a different person. But instead, if I learn to deal with my stuff, I have the tools to regulate when I'm triggered, then I can be more of a presence of mind to just be the support for him, listen to what he needs, both for both of my sons. I always say it with my oldest, because again, with the autism, that like came first.
Yeah.
But for both of them, because we found that both our kids were able to thrive more when we just like took a pause, dealt with our own stuff, and weren't so got to fix the problem.
Right.
You know.
So speaking about that, the work that you were like talking about, that it's kind of, at least I know from my kids,
Mm-hmm,
it's a daily process,
mm-hmm,
not just because we live every day, but because
mm-hmm,
we're raising human
mm-hmm,
beings on a daily
mm-hmm,
basis. They have
right.
school, they have
Mm-hmm,
baths, they have homework, they have, everything. So what does a day in the life of you and your husband raising, these two kids in kind of what one would describe as a very challenging environment given what they're going
mm-hmm,
through? What
mm-hmm.
does a day in the life of your household kind of look like?
Yeah. That's definitely evolved. I think what I've learned is the challenges that we think of, like what come about with like disabilities, are not so much their issues, is that the environmental expectations are, they conflict, right? And so,
Hmm.
like, at the beginning with like my son, I would be like, okay, if we have to go to school, right, we got to get up, get on this time, we got to do these, brush your teeth, get ready, all of that. And he would fight me, or he would melt down. There would be so much resistance, and then I'd be triggered. And I remember, like, when he was young, like, I would get to the point of yelling, and I felt horrible. And I knew, again, from my background, like, that's not what I should
Yeah.
be doing. And for us, a lot of the process has just been unlearning a lot of parenting expectations and advice, and because that's just kind of like a generalized, here's what all kids should do, all parents should do. But my children are unique. And so my son, like, because school is still very, can be overwhelming, he needs routines. So when we wake up, there's like 100 different steps that we have to do for him to feel comfortable leaving the house. And that might sound like a lot, and it is. I mean, there's certainly days I'm like, I don't have the energy, right? But we have to, read a story in a certain way, and then we have to get him dressed in a certain order, and he has to say certain things. And it does probably sound a little like OCD too. But when we're realizing that a lot of these things, it helps him feel grounded, because I think he's so aware of like the nuances in the environment more than a typical child, and that's what creates that anxiety and that dysregulation, because he's feeling unsafe. We learned that these routines give him that groundedness. So it's a lot, right? And I know, as I'm saying, I'm like, that sounds like a lot. I mean, it's become our normal. And same with our other son, like he's got certain things too. Again, he doesn't talk, but he'll be vocal about when things don't go well. So there's just, I mean, my husband and I really, we've been trying to adjust our expectations of what like a routine looks like, of what a day-to-day thing looks like. And so, it's so normal for us now. Like, I don't, when you ask that question, I'm like, I don't know how to describe it. Cause I'm like, oh, we just, we
You
just
just
do.
go through the motions. You
Just
just
go
kind
through
of
the
do it.
motions. Yeah. But there are those levels, right? There's like when I walk my son to school, and if he's like stimming with his hands, because that's how he calms himself, there's looks from other parents, right? There's looks from other kids. And so I have to work on like that triggers me. And I'm like, well, that's because I'm worried about what other people think. And I've had to learn to be like, what? No, my kid he's got the tools that he needs to help. So I'm sorry, I go off of these tangents, but those questions are difficult because there's
Yeah.
so many layers, and but yeah, it's a lot. But day to day is emotionally weighted, a lot of layers to it.
Well, and it is, because it's not it. I mean, and I would expect there to be a lot of layers, because it's not just as simple as, kind of like with somebody like myself, where it's, oh, I wake up, I get I, I throw the kids their clothes and I say, oh, get dressed. I go take a shower, and then I come out and they're dressed, and I throw them in the car and I get them to school. That's what someone like me can do. You can't do that. There are multiple layers of it, and that's what I would expect from an answer like yours. It's a normal type of thing. Um, Putting your kind of kids to the side for a second, are how is from an emotional standpoint, how are I know for the last hour or so, we've been talking a lot about your handling your kids and stuff like that. How are you and your husband emotionally from a marital standpoint? Is your marriage strong as a rock? Do you guys have, I know from an MFT standpoint, a lot of those marriage tips and tricks. Are you able to, are you guys able, I know you
Yeah,
said you psychoanalyze your husband a lot. Are you guys
we're
able to
good.
kind of stick together? I mean, I know that's a lot, but and again, I kind of tie back to my general thought, and maybe it's just a kind of a flash in the pan thought, that I do think that your experience as a marriage family therapist has really helped kind of your situation. Has it helped your marriage? Are you guys really strong, and what do you guys do to really kind of stay connected through a lot of the chaos that's going on with you and your kids?
And I look at like, I mean, no matter what is going on, I think our marriage goes through the ups and downs just like anyone else, right? I think
Mhm.
sometimes it will just look different, or the whys, or the maybe how like something that is challenging for you might not be for us, but something that's challenging for us might not be for you. And I think,
Yeah.
right, and so, but that's what I've learned. But so our marriage, yeah, I mean, having the background helps. We make it a priority. Like we still make sure we're dating all the time. So, my husband's a swim coach right now. It's a busier time of the year for him too. But I'm like, during this time, we need regular dates to connect. And it is definitely harder with the kids that we have, because oftentimes, like my oldest doesn't want to be with my youngest, because a lot of the things my youngest does, like if he cries or anything, it will trigger my older son's hearing sensitivities. And so a lot of our lives have to be separate. I'm with one kid and my husband's with another. And that does put a strain on our relationship for sure. So I'm not going to lie and be like, oh yeah, we're, perfect. Everything's great. We've got this together, because I know all the things. But I do think I will say our relationship is strong because we actually, I think, do really well when things are tough, because we can have those conversations. And I am lucky. I can't speak for my husband. He may disagree, but he has been my rock. A big reason why I love him so much is he allows me to just be authentically me. And so if I'm having a meltdown or a breakdown, he's just there. We've been able to weather the storm, but it is hard. And I know, I would say for him, it's probably harder because I think as a woman, there's more resources for, like, I can talk to my girlfriends about this more. I can go on, I'm a more like social media person, so I like to just go on and listen to stories. He doesn't have the time or necessarily the wherewithal of the people to talk to about it. So I do try to encourage him to talk more to other people, because I know he probably is holding in a lot more than maybe he lets on. But relationship wise, and I'm sure if we really we're so in go mode and just trying to survive, I think like there's probably more things that we could use to help with our relationship to be even stronger. But right now, yeah.
Are you guys big into advocacy groups? Because I know when people have a lot of children, or even themselves are dealing with a lot of developmental issues, they're really big with advocacy groups. Are you guys involved with a lot of different advocacy groups, or a couple of them?
We're not as much. We're both pretty introverted people, so that's been a challenge too. It's definitely
I
isolating.
remember you from high school. Yes, that's true. I
I
can
just
attest to that.
Yeah, I'm not like, and I enjoy like good connections with some people, but sometimes like the bigness, everyone's opinions about things, like it just, I'm just trying to like be there for mine, and that can be overstimulating for me. So no, I mean,
Mhm.
I would like to. I mean, I would like to have more community around it, more connection to places like that can make some actual change, because it's definitely like I want to advocate. I think I see like in the school system so much that needs to be changed, and a lot of advocacy around helping, because all kids are unique. It doesn't really even matter if you're dealing with disabilities or not. And then so much of the structure of school that's so compliance based, and there's one way to do it. There's a right or wrong answer. I think that's very harmful in terms of our unique human experiences and emotions and everything. That's a
Mhm.
conversation for another day.
Yeah.
But no, no, we're not as involved maybe as we probably would want to be.
So if you had, and this is kind of how I normally kind of close up different, or the different podcasts. So if you had a patient sit down, and it was like a first time patient, and they were just completely overwhelmed, and they just said, I had, let's just say they heard the podcast. They came across the podcast. They had heard the podcast, and they said, I have two kids who have developmental issues, and I'm just at my wit's end, and they don't have the same developmental issues that your children have, but they have developmental issues nonetheless. And I'm just at my wit's end. What sort of emotional advice would you give to somebody that is just breaking down, kind of sticking with the theme of the podcast, right? It's not the story, it's the emotions. What kind of advice would you give to somebody in terms of emotions, and just kind of how to not only communicate with your kids, but how to handle things from an emotional standpoint, or at least how to cope, and how to just kind of stick through and make it through? Like what kind of conversations would you have with them to start something out?
Yeah, it's a great question. Um, First and foremost, whatever you're feeling right now is valid. Whatever's coming up, our brains are meant to do what they need to do to heal. And so, whatever, for me, it's about validating the emotion first. If we go quickly to try and get rid of it, cope with it, push it away, you're going to be stuck in this, like, constantly feeling that, because now we're gaslighting ourselves essentially. And that's where even more mental health challenges become. We lose trust with ourselves. We stop listening to ourselves. And for me, my work is to help bring people back to an authentic connection and trust with themselves. And it starts with, if you're dealing with these hard things and you're feeling upset and you're at your wit's end, why wouldn't you be? Of course you are. Like, let's sit there, let's give that space and validate it, and say you're human, and of course you're going to feel that way. Let's give that time to heal first, because that needs to be what's taken care of. And then, because any advice, any logic, when you're in that emotional state, you're not going to hear it. Your brain is not equipped to deal with that yet. And a lot of times I think it's hard because in our culture we want to move past it, right? We don't have patience for that. That's why they say, like, healing is not for the weak, because it's not. But when someone's going through something so big like that, you're like your children having diagnoses, and it's bringing up all those emotions. For me, it's about validating that experience and saying it's okay, and this is a safe space to feel that. You deserve a chance to just feel that and not have any judgment around it, not have anyone try to take that away. But let's sit with that and honor our bodies and our minds to allow it to do the healing process that it's meant to do. So,
Wow, that's awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing your story today, Taylor.
of
And
course.
I thank you for coming on, closing out Women's History Month. Thank you for being the last minute guest. I was I was actually thinking I wasn't gonna have anybody on, so thanks for reaching out. You know,
Sure.
the universe kind of brought you to my plate at the last second, and so I thank you for being on. And you know, I hope some of the listeners out there got something out of this, and you know, I hope you got some relief from being able to share your story. I know I got something out of it. Some emotional release from hearing your story too. And you know, yeah, so thank you for being on, and we'll definitely be talking to you soon. So
Sounds
thank you
great.
very much.
Thanks, Brandon.